Let's bring back when are we finally going to get the DNA and bring back when is Jurassic Park really happening, Steve?
Well, it's as soon as we hit it big.
All right. So we're going to fund it ourselves. We're going to Jeff Bezos this thing.
If I've learned anything from the movies, it's a great idea.
Yeah. No, it seems like a good idea. Things always turn out well. Every movie's had a happy ending.
Yes.
So, yeah. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Greg.
How's it going?
It's going good. How about you?
It's going pretty good. I'm happy to talk to you today.
Me too.
I mean, before we got on, we had a little pre-Roy sighting coming in. So I can't wait to talk about this. But first, I want to welcome everyone to episode 9 of BirdBrag. I'm Greg.
I'm Steve.
And we're here to talk about nature and stuff. And I don't know, should we get right into Big Roy or should we save that for later?
We could cover Big Roy briefly, I guess.
Yeah. All right. So I stopped Steve as we were just about to talk because I wanted to save it. I was as the once famous podcast, Save It for the Show. We wanted to save it for the show. So lay it on me.
So Big Roy sent me an email wondering when we're going to drop our next episode.
Okay. Whoa. You're speeding by this. We need to explain who Big Roy is.
I don't know who Big Roy is. He's a fan. I think he's a little bit elderly that's been sending us some emails, and he's a little worried about our drinking, I think.
Oh,
but he's a big fan of the show. So
that's good.
Yeah.
And I was told by a fan to back off on the cursing too. So I can't promise these things though. I mean, I could keep it in my head but I don't know.
I think we have a good formula.
I mean, I click the explicit box every time we post. So
yeah. What more can you ask?
No, I don't know. All right. Before we get started, to Big Roy's point, I always ask, what are you drinking?
So today I'm a little bit different. Normally I save this for kind of warm weather. And as you know, in this area, it was kind of rainy and cloudy and overcast today, but it's about all I have left. So my wife, Alicia, who has the palate of a child, she has recently developed a taste for some of my booze. And so I went the other day to make myself a gin and tonic, which I love to drink by the pool.
Yeah.
And she had polished off a Costco-sized bottle of the Bombay Sapphire. So the next time I was at the store, I bought a new gin that I'd never tried before. It's this Roku gin.
Ooh, it's Japanese gin.
Yeah, it's made by the company that makes the Suntory whiskey. So.
Oh man, which is funny. It was almost my pick today.
Was Suntory?
Yeah, almost was. Oh. Maybe next episode.
I got to admit the bottle's what sealed it for me. It's pretty classy looking bottle.
Oh yeah, very.
It's kind of hexagonal shaped and got the Japanese art on it. And
Did you say hexagonal?
I did.
That was the list. So maybe this is the ASMR portion of Steve. Maybe you give me one hexagonal just for the mic.
Hexagonal.
Yeah. See, I don't know what that does to the listeners. We have no idea.
Well, you have to say hexagonal, I think, in more of a scientific voice as opposed to the German. So.
Oh yeah. What was the German word?
Zirkeln. You have to lean into the mic like that too.
Zirkeln. Oh, well, I'm glad you asked. What I'm drinking, Steve, is the Michter's small. Well, let me do this first. Michter's small batch American whiskey. Which have you had the Michter's before?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's one of my favorites, and it's old. What I love is on the bottle, it says distilled in small batches according to Michter's pre-Revolutionary War quality standards dating back to 1753. Huh. And it's an 83.4 proof, not 80 proof. So, all right, well, I'm going to pour a glass.
All right. Yeah, this gin's an 86 proof.
86 proof.
Yeah.
All right. Cheers, bud.
Cheers, Greg.
So we're covering California today because I'm in San Diego. You're in Sacramento region. So we got the state covered today. So what are we talking about today?
Today we're going to be talking about a bird that you've probably seen before called the American White Pelican.
And that sounds exciting. Why this bird?
I saw a huge flock of them at work today, probably 80, 85 birds flying over. And I just thought it'd be a good subject to cover. And so here we are.
Awesome. I do it. I do it every time. I forgot my note-taking instruments.
Oh man.
I would have been lost. I don't know how I would have gotten by. Well, that's exciting. All right. So pelicans are like small birds, like hummingbirds, right?
They're pretty close, yeah. So the this particular pelican that we're talking about, it's about 5 feet from tail to tip of the beak, and even more impressive is their wingspan, which can be over 9 feet. So for those of you working on the metric system, that's about 3 meters of wingspan.
Yeah, 3 meters, 3 big steps to get from one side to the other.
Yeah.
And where do we find these guys?
So the American White Pelicans, you probably down in San Diego, you see the brown pelicans a lot. I'm sure they're there all the time. And American White Pelicans, they breed more inland, but they are North American species. They breed in a lot of the actually more arid regions of the middle part of the continent, all the way up into the wetland areas in Canada, over the Great Lakes. In fact, they do breed a little bit in California, in northeastern California. And the biggest breeding colony is actually in the Great Salt Lake on an island where it's usually around 10,000 birds that nest there.
So are we talking about a bird that's geographically west of the Rockies, west of the Mississippi, as I like to say?
They're west of the Mississippi, but in migration, they can be found a lot of different places in North America. You'll see them in east of the Mississippi River in migration because they get up really high and they can soar so easy on those big long wings. And then when they migrate down to their winter areas, they do go all the way to the East Coast, but that's restricted to the kind of south coast of the United States and then into Mexico. There actually are a couple of breeding areas in Mexico and Texas, but those birds are resident in those areas year round. They don't really migrate.
All right. I always ask, and you started it, but paint the picture for us. Paint the detailed picture so we can have this in our minds.
So obviously the first thing you're going to see is this gigantic bird. I mean, can look like a small plane if they're flying low enough. And for the most part, when you see them there, it's a pure white bird except for their primary feathers, which are all the wing feathers that would be on the back edge of the wing are just jet black. So it's just this really neat contrast of white with those jet black wingtips. And then their beak, which is of course, 12, 15 inches long, like you picture a pelican bill, and their feet can be, they're kind of yellowish for the most part, but then in the breeding season, they get a really kind of bright orange. So it's a pretty striking bird from top to bottom. I mean, that black and white is a really neat combo when it's perfect like that, and it's a nice line contrasting it.
And are they hanging out together? Do you find these guys solo? Like what's their trend on that?
Yeah, typically you always see them in groups of at least 10 or 20, if not more. Like I mentioned that they breed in nesting colonies. So they'll find like islands in lakes or in kind of emergent marsh areas where they nest on these islands in huge groups of several hundred pairs. And they typically, after the chicks hatch, they actually leave them and forage together for food and then come back and feed the chicks and things like that. So they're very, very social bird.
Well, it's interesting because I would think with a bird that big, they need a lot of energy to survive and a lot of food. And it seems like when they have a lot of them, they'd be competing for food in that way. Yeah,
I mean, they definitely, you would think that. And one of the things about pelicans, they're not like so typically when you think of the brown pelicans on the coast feeding, I'm sure you've seen the footage of these brown pelicans diving from, hundreds of feet in the air and plunging into the ocean and catching fish and then coming out of the water to get them. But the white pelicans, they feed while they're swimming in the water. So they actually feed and just kind of dip their bills into the water to catch fish. And they feed in really shallow water. And one of the things they do is they'll often kind of cooperatively feed. So they'll go along in formation, kind of side by side, working towards a shore.
Trapping those guys.
Trapping them, and then it's neat to watch. They all dip their head in at once, and then dip it back out and tip their head way up and swallow the fish. And sometimes they'll even do it. I've seen them do it in a circle where they all make a circle and they get closer and closer together. And as soon as I don't know how they know exactly when to dip, and they all dip in together in a perfect circle and come up. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I want to know which one of the birds tells them to go. I want to know which one does the countdown. 3.
I don't know.
2.
It's probably Big Roy.
1. Yeah, well, Big Roy for sure. Well, so throwback. We love talking about kids and when we were watching one of the kids shows and stuff. And I just distinctly remember those cartoons with the pelicans where they have the big, was it a gullet? What is it? Like part of their beak or what, where you see the fish where they would go down and get it?
They often call it a gular pouch.
Ooh, the cooler pouch. I'm telling you, there's a whole offshoot of BirdBrag. That's ASMR.
One whole episode.
Yeah, just one whole special episode. A gular pouch. So the gular pouch. And I imagine with a bird this big, they could catch pretty darn big fish as well.
They can. I've seen them catch fish that are probably 12 inches or more long, but most of the fish they catch are actually smaller than that. And they also will eat, like when they do winter sometimes on the coast, and so they'll eat squid, and in some of the freshwater areas they'll eat like salamander sometimes if they're in the water. But actually most of the fish that they eat aren't huge, even though they have the capacity for it.
But I got to imagine that they're eating for a good part of the day to keep that much energy going.
Yeah, they eat a lot of fish. Yeah, for sure.
But that's interesting though, that salamanders and other things, but besides the fish that they would eat, I can't imagine that any bugs would be big enough to sustain these guys either.
Yeah, you know what? I'm sure they eat bugs kind of incidentally to what they're targeting. But they get that big mouthful of water and whatever fits in their gular pouch, and then when they lift up their head, all the water kind of spills out, and then whatever's left in there is what makes it down.
That's a pretty good trick too. So they have to eat the fish without absorbing all that water.
Yeah,
that's pretty good. Yeah, go for it.
They're pretty well adapted to that, making the best use of that.
Yeah, I mean, evolution. It's a wonderful thing. You know what my next question is? Guess what I'm thinking?
Let's see. We covered the range and the appearance. So,
what's one of my favorite things to talk about?
I would guess we're headed to clutch size.
Clutch. We're going to clutch size. Lay it on me. Let's talk clutch. Let's talk clutches. 1 clutch, 2 clutch. How many clutches? Let's start there. How many clutches a year?
So typically a pelican's only going to have 1 clutch a year. That's it. And part of the reason for that is it takes them a long time to get from start to finish. And then most of the populations have to migrate. So you can imagine with a big bird like that, you're going to have an incubation period that's a little bit longer than that 3 weeks we were talking about, or the fledgling period that's a little longer than that 3-week period we were talking about with hummingbirds. So they typically lay 1 or 2 eggs, although usually only one of the chicks actually makes it. Mm-hmm. Typically, sometimes they kind of seem to have some fertility problems, and I'm not sure why. And sometimes only one will hatch, and sometimes both will hatch. And then but oftentimes one of the chicks will kind of harass and bully the other one to death and steal all the food, and the other one will actually be killed. And so there's only one that usually makes it.
Wow. And, that's a pretty dramatic start to only the strong survive.
Yeah. Taking it seriously when they're battling their siblings for dinner.
Yeah, no kidding.
It kind of goes to your point. They need a lot of calories to grow a big bird like that so fast. And these adults, they're flying back and forth to their feeding areas and coming back to feed these chicks. And you can only do so much sometimes,
All right, Leia. So how big is the migratory pattern for these guys? Will they go great distances between seasons?
The ones that breed all the way up in Canada, they typically winter in Southern California and Mexico. So, we're probably looking at 1,000, 1,500 miles for some of these birds. But then others, like I mentioned, the breeding ones in Texas and Mexico, they typically don't really migrate at all. Although they still range kind of widely when they're just in their day-to-day existence. Like we see birds here in Sacramento that I'm not even sure where they nest, if they're the northeastern California birds or they're nesting in northern Nevada, but you'll see them most months out of the year when, they probably have chicks somewhere and maybe they're failed nesters or something like that. But you do see them, they do range very widely. Once they catch those thermals and get way up in the air, it's really not that much for them to travel 30, 40 miles to, between breeding and feeding grounds.
Any idea how fast those guys can go? I mean, like you said, that image is very clear in my head of these birds diving down, not the ones that we're talking about, but the brown ones. But how fast can these guys go? How many miles can they travel in a day?
I don't know. I'm not sure, but they always look like they're going slow. In fact, when you see them take off from the water, you imagine with the 9-foot wingspan, it looks like they're not going to make it up half the time. But then once they're up in the air, like they get really high, so you can hardly see them. And I imagine they could go hundreds of miles in a day. Man. Just get high and kind of glide down to wherever they're headed. So
really conserve their energy and just glide from those points.
Yeah.
That's amazing. All right. What else? What else you got for us?
So they nest on the ground. So on these breeding colonies, and usually they're islands, like I said, they kind of make these 2-foot diameter depressions and they lay their eggs right on the ground. Sometimes they're in some sparse vegetation. Sometimes they're under trees, if there are trees in the area where they are. But that's one of the reasons that they're adapted to nest on islands. And it's also one of the things that causes them some of their problems. So if they nest on islands and there's a drought and the island becomes connected to the mainland, or if it gets shallow enough, then might have coyotes and things like that coming over and predating the eggs and the young. And the other thing is they're kind of susceptible to the opposite, where if these areas get flooded too much, it could actually, put their eggs underwater and ruin their breeding effort in that way.
What are they making their nest out of? You said that they make them in depressions, but are they helping the eggs out by adding to it?
Not usually. They usually don't collect anything to add to their nests. There are some of them sometimes put twigs and stuff in there, but for the most part, it's just pretty bare, and they're more creating a depression rather than adding anything into it.
How are they creating it?
They use their bill.
That's cool.
Yeah. And they don't make it too deep usually, like maybe 6 inches deep. And usually by the end of the season, it's kind of filled in and it's only a couple inches deep. So you can see them, but it's not like a huge, crater in the ground or anything like that.
All right. What else do you have for us?
So the eggs take, what do they take? About maybe a month to hatch, I think. And then the nestlings, they stay in the nest for a few weeks. And then after that, they all kind of group together, whichever ones make it to that period. And then for another probably month, they all stay together. And they usually call that a creche, like your nativity scene, or
that's great.
Or a pod. And then, so they'll all stay together, and then the adults will go back and forth between the breeding grounds to feed them. Because some of the lakes where these islands are, they're pretty alkaline. Some of the Great Basin lakes, they don't have any outlets, so they're pretty alkaline. And so sometimes they won't even forage in the lakes where the islands that they nest in are. So they might have a good ways to go, and they'll leave these young kind of in these big groups.
And this is in the spring, I take it?
Yeah. And then usually by about September, October, that's when they're starting to migrate back to their wintering grounds, which are, like I mentioned, in along the coast of Southern California and the rest of the Southern United States and Mexico.
That's what I do for winter. I go down to.
You're there now.
Man. As much as I can. I love it. But yes, in the winter, it's some, I've been getting suntans in December in San Diego. Sometimes it's amazing.
Yeah, we've been having some crazy weather here. I think a couple times ago when we talked, it was like 97 degrees, and then today we were battling thunderstorms all day. It was quite a change.
How much do I love thunderstorms?
Oh,
I love thunderstorms. Don't you wish you could just conjure those up? I mean, sometimes you just feel like, I'm pretty sure that sometimes our mood creates the thunderstorms too. Like you just, the collective ennui of what's going on in our country right now might have created those thunderstorms.
That's as good a theory as any.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, man, yeah, I've become a big fan of the American White Pelican. Any other facts to leave our listeners with before we move on?
No, I think that about covers what we want to get through today. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. All right. So Greg's 5. What I was going to bring up today is something that you and I've done a couple times, and I love it. And I just never would have thought that I love it. And that's it's trap, skeet, and sporting clays and shooting sports. And I was introduced to this by a good friend. I'm a pretty liberal guy. I never owned a gun, never shot a handgun, and nothing against it. I'm for the Second Amendment. I think that we have a right as citizens to protect ourselves from our government as much as the government protects us. But I just didn't think about it a whole lot. So I went out with a good friend, Stan, who's also in kind of advertising production. He owns a production company. And I was thinking about my youngest kid, Lucky. His name's Luke, and we call him Lucky, who just turned 18. And he got into it. He got into this sport. And what a wonderful sport. Hand-eye, and the youth sports side of it, all the kids out there are really good kids. Several of them are wearing MAGA hats, but what are you going to do about that? And it would make sense, the culture. And so we're the one family who's showing up in the BMW, non-4-wheel drive, to these events, and everyone was so accepting. And so the difference too is there's 4 disciplines, but the 3 main disciplines are trap, which the clays move right away from you, and it's the best out of 100. There's skeet that kind of cross you, and then sporting clays. Well, I mean, that's I think where the jam is. That's where my favorite is. And the only way, and Stan described it this way, and I use it all the time, it's like golf. You have anywhere between 15 and 30 stations, and those clays can be doing anything. They could be coming at you. They can be going over your head. They could be doing what they call rabbit and rolling on the ground, and you keep score like golf. And like I said, you and I have done it together. We've gone out there and shot. I think it's a great sport.
Sure, it is. You can spend a lot of good time. It can be a little expensive though if you're not careful.
And I was lucky because the group took us under their wing and really helped us out. And we were borrowing guns. And what's great is that depending on who is sponsoring it, usually the shells are free for the kids or very cheap. For they're trying to get these kids into it. It's much like golf or any other youth sport, right? They're trying to really encourage these kids to be part of it. But man, I was so pleasantly surprised by the way that my kid took to it, and then just the fun we've had with it.
It's kind of funny because I grew up bird hunting and stuff like that when I was a kid, and I think by now you've probably shot more rounds of trap and skeet than I have in my life.
Do you think that's true?
I think it is.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so I'll go out there, and we have a couple guns that we use, and I will, and they encourage the parents to go out and participate with the kids sometimes. And in sporting clays, the kids are a couple stations ahead, and you'll see the parents following behind. And I don't know, it's just super cool. And in Northern California, with these beautiful rolling hills and the foothills, and it's pretty epic. Some of the photos that I've taken of these kids out there with these brown rolling hills and these blue skies dotted with white clouds, it's really, really something. And it's interesting because when I'm pretty liberal. A lot of my friends are liberal Californians. When I tell them about the sport, their eyes get like saucers, right? They're like, oh, what are you talking about? And it kind of makes me like it even more. It's like the contrarian in me really gets a kick out of it. It really gets, so it's pretty funny. I've been threatening to take, I own a partner at a new agency, and I'm threatening to take all the staff out to do it. And I think that it's pretty funny because half usually really like it, and half, Someone will get kicked funny and their shoulder hurts, and there's always something pretty funny with that. All right. Well, what did we learn? What did we learn today? We learned about Japanese gin. What? I had no idea. I mean, I love Japanese whiskey. I love Kokori and Saturi, and I mean, the Hibiki. Hibiki is one of my favorites. Didn't know about Japanese gin. Gin is really the it kind of drink right now. It kind of seems.
Is it really?
It sure seems like it. Like gin cocktails are kind of like. And what's his face? Ryan Reynolds has aviation. Aviation gin now. I think it's like something different, right? And I love my vodka martini at night. Like I will often do, one to after work and make a nice martini to settle down. But I'm starting to get into the gin, so that's good. I'll have to figure that out. All right. Yeah. So we talked about the American White Pelican. We talked about the brown pelican briefly as well. What else did we learn? We learned about its striking coloring. The white with the black that really you enjoy. One clutch a year, and it's survival of the fittest right from the bat. There might be 2 eggs, but yeah, they're it's Game of Thrones time.
You want another vocabulary word?
Yeah, lay it on me.
Siblicide.
Oh, siblicide. All right,
that's when the big pelican kills his bro.
Yeah, no, I think it speaks for itself. Siblicide. I've only had those thoughts about 800 times with my siblings. I'm sure that they've had more about me too. Nest on islands. They nest on islands. That's a screenplay right there. I could see that. I could see that happening. And then it's like a nativity scene.
Right. With all the young pelicans sticking their beaks up to be fed by the feast of the fishes.
And then we talked about some shooting sports and some things that surprised me, teach an old dog new tricks. Didn't know that I would get into it. Yeah. And I love going out. We'll have to figure out again. And going out with my cousin Scott was always a good time. And just really enjoy that. So, all right. Well, to tease episode 10 coming up, we have a special episode coming up for the next episode. Hasn't been recorded yet. We got our game plan, but I'm excited to see how that goes. I would be excited if we could do a few more of these special episodes.
Oh, one other thing. Were we going to talk about the mystery bird this episode?
Yeah. Okay. So let's do it. I do want to talk. So for listeners who have going back to episode 7, 8, 9, now 9, we had a listener send in a picture, which we've posted, which Steve's had a few comments on and guesses of what it could be. So have you come to your final answer on what that bird is?
Yeah, I know it was a little wishy-washy when you first showed it to me.
Well, it wasn't the best image I know when I showed it to you, so lay it on us.
After getting the pics in person, I think it's definitely one of our featured birds on BirdBrag, the black phoebe.
It's a black phoebe.
Without a doubt. So,
and we talked about that some people were calling it in the post a black bird, which is not untrue. It's a lowercase b blackbird. When we talk about a blackbird, a uppercase B and an uppercase B, a blackbird, that's something different, right?
Well, there's a few different kinds of blackbirds. In fact, there's they belong to the icterid family, but there's red-winged blackbirds, yellow-headed blackbirds, tricolored blackbirds. So while the black phoebe that you've identified might be a blackbird, it's not a blackbird. No, it's, as we learned, it's a tyrant flycatcher, which is not the same family as the blackbirds.
Yeah. See?
But yeah,
I mean, I don't know how far into this season we are, but I mean, I know how much I've already learned. Do we have? Oh, you know what? Sometimes you have the call of these birds. Do pelicans have a distinct call that we want to talk about?
I'm hoping to. Well, I'm not going to say that, but the pelicans, except when they're nesting colonies, which I've never really been around too much. Whenever you see them, the thing that strikes you about their call is that it's perfectly silent. They never make a noise. That's
good. So sometimes
it's pretty cool when you're walking out there in the wetlands and stuff like that, and all of a sudden you either see a shadow or for some reason you just look up and 30 feet over the deck, there's a big 9-foot wingspan pelican soaring over your head, and you had no idea it was even there.
That's amazing.
If it was a pterodactyl, it would have ate you.
Let's bring back when are we finally going to get the DNA and bring back when is Jurassic Park really happening, Steve?
Well, as soon as we hit it big.
All right. So we're going to fund it ourselves. We're going to Jeff Bezos this thing.
If I've learned anything from the movies, it's a great idea.
Yeah. No, it seems like a good idea. Things always turn out well. Every movie's had a happy ending.
Yes.
So, yeah. All right. Well, I think we've done it all. I think we've said it all.
I agree.
Can you hear that?
Yeah.
That's the music coming. That's our theme music coming up.
Oh, no, I can't hear that.
Oh, yeah. All right, buddy. I'll talk to you soon.
You just play us out. All right. See you, Greg.
See ya.